Hey everyone, this is Derek Weeks. Wanted to just come on and tell you we did have a 1:30 session with Brian Dawson, our friend from Cloudbees, who is going to talk about continuous delivery and artifact management. Unfortunately, due to a family emergency he had this morning, he had to cancel. So Brian's a good friend of ours. We definitely want to hear his session. So once he frees up, we'll get him on a Google Hangout here, record his session, and make it available with the recordings from all the others. So I apologize for that. Sometimes with live events things happen, but we will be back on this channel at 2 p.m. with Helen Beal from Ranger 4, another good friend of ours in the DevSecops community from London, who's been doing a lot with DevSecops gaming. Or gamification, I should say, and also working with the DevSecops Days organizing team in London. So we'll hear a little more about Helen and her work at Ranger 4, and we'll be back live at 2 p.m. Hey everyone, Derek Weeks here. Yeah, let me quiet that computer down. We are going to be back on in just a couple of minutes here with Helen Beal. I see that Helen is already in the channel, so I am going to put her slide up and pull me off the video. Again, we're going to get started at 2 p.m. Eastern, so it looks like in about 3 minutes here. Hi, Helen. We'll just
probably need to unmute myself then. Well. Hello?
And let me see. Do I have my volume up? And can I hear you? I can't hear you.
You can?
I can hear you now.
Great.
Okay, perfect. So I know that that's working. And as I said, we'll get started in 3 minutes, 2 to 3 minutes.
Great.
Okay, Helen, we are back on. It's 2 p.m. Eastern. Are you in London today?
I am actually in Chichester.
Wow. Awesome. I haven't talked to you in a while, it seems like. You're like Brian Dawson, who I used to see all the time at conferences, and now I rarely see, except for online or on Twitter. I know you're very active with you and your team on Twitter. So looking forward to hearing the latest and greatest from you today.
Great. Hopefully I'll do my best.
Yeah. So why don't we get you to, we'll kick things off here at 2 o'clock. Why don't we get you to share your desktop?
Oh, sorry. I thought I was.
No, I see your picture.
It was earlier. It probably broke when I came out to unmute myself. So there you go. How's that now?
I do see your slides. I see the full slide view. So Helen Beal, DevOpsologist at Ranger 4, a great, as I mentioned in the other channel just before the break, a great and vocal member of the DevOps community in London, in the UK, and across Europe as well. I know Helen speaks at a lot of different events, meetups, and conferences. I know Helen is also on the organizing team for DevSecops Days coming up in London at the very end of June. So we're looking forward to more about that. We'll put a link for DevSecOps Days London in the Slack channel for any of you that that happen to be interested in that event and can make it over. But Helen, without further ado, let's have you kick things off here for the 2 o'clock track.
Awesome, thanks, Derek. So, hello everyone. As Derek said, I'm Helen. I work for Range 4. I'm a DevOpsologist, which is a job title I made up myself because in DevOps we don't really like job titles, so I prefer to think of it as a role descriptor. That what I do is essentially study DevOps. That's what I do all day, every day. So I do that with our customers. So we help organizations mature using DevOps principles and practices. We have a range of services that help do that, from capability assessments and various other workshops and training and games and coaching and all sorts of various different things that we do. But today I'm going to focus in on DevSecops and specifically explore the foundational nature of artifact repositories in a DevSecops toolchain. So I've got a short agenda for us. We're going to look at 3 things mainly. We're going to explore what's driving this thing called DevOps to begin with. Then we'll have a think about artifact repositories and where they sit in an organization and who uses them and when they get used. And then we'll look at DevOps toolchains in a bit more detail and DevSecops toolchains and see what the relationship looks like between that and the artifact repository. So first of all, let's have a think about DevSecops. So last year, I was at a conference in Belfast that was AppSec EU, and I was on the DevSecops track, and I was talking about what is a DevSecops engineer, as we've been developing a course for the DevOps Institute around specifically that. And speaking to some of my fellow speakers in the track, I was surprised to discover that not everybody was on board with the word DevSecops, which surprised me since we were actually on a DevSecops track at the AppSec EU event. But I did ask them what the issue was with it, and they kind of said, well, we think there's a danger that it could create another silo. People have a hard time understanding what DevOps is about sometimes anyway, and we're not sure there's a need for another thing. So I had a good think about that and chats with other people. And I kind of decided that actually I think there's very much a place for DevSecops in the world. So DevOps, as you probably all know, is talking about trying to reduce the pain of segregated development and IT operations teams. So in the past, where they've been very siloed, we've seen lots of pain. Things like, I can't believe development are asking for admin access to production systems. I can't believe how long it takes operations to provision me an environment. All these sort of complaints about each other. So DevOps is set to try and help people become more agile and more lean and collaborate more effectively. And DevSecops brings security into that mix as well. So I think one of the main reasons DevSecops should be, if you like, allowed to stay or should be a key focus for us is because security has often been quite left behind in the DevOps debate. So DevOps has come quite a long way over the 10 years or so that it's been around, and we now often talk about it being about governance of the whole value stream, end to end, so everybody being involved in it. But security still did get quite left behind. So if you look at things like the DevOps Handbook, security is mentioned last on the kind of subtitle. It's the last chapter in there. So what DevSecops is trying to do is shine light on this element of the DevOps world and give us some more focus on it. And I often say it's a little bit like feminism. Until things are equal, we're going to need feminism. Until security is properly dealt with, then we need DevSecops to help us give us more focus on it. So here are some kind of key principles around the DevSecops world. The first really is that security is everyone's job. So everyone needs to take responsibility for understanding how they are securing their applications and how they are making sure they can't be breached. Earlier on in the year, Sonatype produced their annual State of the Software Supply Chain Survey, and we learned many, many things. I'll talk about some more later. But one of the things that we looked at was this constraint. So to every 100 developers, people often have 10 IT operations people and have 1 security person. We know that the security industry is massively under-resourced. You'll read things like 1 million security roles open worldwide and things. we know from our daily experience working with security teams in organisations that there's only a handful of them often, and they're very far away from us, and they're very busy, and they're very difficult to get hold of. They're very difficult to get time from. So it's a key constraint we're trying to address with DevSecOps. We're trying to get some security knowledge into everybody's heads. We're trying to automate it so that we don't have a people bottleneck. And then this next key principle is about shifting left. So we've talked about shifting left for many years in the context of testing. We know how much cheaper it is to remediate a defect early on in the software development lifecycle, and how much more expensive it is the further it gets downstream. And the same is true for a security vulnerability. We want to catch everything as early as we can. And we really want to take kind of the most grown-up, proactive approach to risk that we can. We want to mitigate it. We want to do everything we can to make sure it's there. We don't want to sign it off. We don't want to just go, let's try not to do that. We don't want to just insure ourselves. We want to make sure that we and our customers are properly protected. And then the final one that we have here is about nurturing safety culture. So we talk about culture a lot in the DevOps world. Many of you will be familiar with the CALMS acronym that we frequently use to describe what DevOps is about. And CALMS stands for culture, automation, lean, measurement, and sharing. This culture is a big part of what we do, and it's quite new in some respects in the IT world to have proper conversations about behaviours and feelings, and whether people are afraid of failure, whether people are blamed and punished for things that happen, whether people trust each other, whether there is respect, whether there's pride in work, whether people feel empowered, whether they have autonomy, whether people are properly able to learn and attain mastery, whether everyone fully understands an organisational why and shares it and are all on the same page, and whether people have purpose. There's many, many elements of culture that we need to look at. And then, of course, behind all of this, we're also in a world that's increasingly digitised and an exponential amount of threats coming our way all the time. So this stuff just keeps getting harder. So let's have a look at safety culture in a little bit more detail from a DevOps perspective. So I like to talk about failure quite a lot with our customers. Most organisations are quite bad at recognising failure as a learning opportunity, and it's entirely understandable why that is the case. It's because as individual humans, we've all been brought up to feel failure is an embarrassing and humiliating thing that must be avoided at all costs. So to reframe failure as a learning opportunity is quite hard, but it can be done. So we have, if you like, when we're considering these failure conversations and these safety conversations, we need to think about the cultural and behavioural element, but also the systemic safety. So it's no good saying, right, everybody, we've empowered you to fail, go fail, and then everything breaks catastrophically. These two things have to go hand in hand, that people are willing, able, and fearless about experimentation. They're courageous about trying new things, but they are protected from doing anything awful. So on the left-hand side, I've talked about understanding and reframing that failure is a learning opportunity. So things we can do to help with that. People, Spotify, if you've seen the engineering culture videos, they talk about the fail walls. Lots of our customers experiment with fail walls and improvement walls, and putting things up there and making them visible and generating discussion about them and making improvements. Some organisations have awards for failure. Actually have their 3-armed jumper. So other people have awards for kind of most dramatically failed project. Those awards are intended to recognise the adventure of innovation. We must ensure that accountability and goals are shared across and between teams, and that helps us not be in contention with each other and work together. We must make experimentation time explicit so we can write it in the product backlog so people know that they are empowered to experiment. Quite a common problem we see is that people know they need to empower their people, but the people haven't been empowered before. So their behaviour has learned not to do new things because they have not had permission, and they've probably been told that's not their job previously. So it's actually no good telling people they're now empowered. We really have to help people know that they are empowered. We can have collaboration platforms, so very effective things like Confluence and wikis, and using things like ChatOps can help share knowledge, share learnings, share expertise. Another organisation has introduced almost like an amnesty around failure. So they discovered a tactical behavioural change technique of basically handing everybody Monopoly get out jail free cards, so the leaders can hand out packs and people can bring them to the leader, and everyone knows that this failure is a learning opportunity, so there will be no shouting and there will be no blame. There will be a healthy investigation into what's going on. And then systemically, there are all sorts of things in the DevOps canon that help us here. They're around automation. So, continuous integration, we can say, don't, stop that if these tests fail. Deployment automation allows us to do things like redeploy last known good state virtually instantly should we fall into a problem. We can do limited blast radius, so we can have feature toggling, canary testing. We can use blue-green, test in live environments and switch between them as and when they become stable. We can use microservices, which again allow us to limit the blast radius. We can incorporate things like when an issue is raised in service desk, we can potentially automatically raise that into Jira, thus tightening that link and that loop between those two areas. We've got APM tools like Dynatrace and AppDynamics that can give us a lot of warning about when something is becoming unstable, so we can do something about it nice and early. I mentioned we've got ChatOps, so ways to bring disparate teams, geographically dispersed teams together to look at problems. And then increasingly, we're considering things like chaos engineering, so purposefully breaking things to teach us more about how to keep them running. So lots of things we can use there. So as I said, the next thing we're going to do is have a think about who uses artifact repositories. So I found this quote earlier on the Sonatype blog from Manfred. It's linked in the slides, which I'm sure we'll be getting to everybody at some point. So it says that manufacturing without a warehouse is basically the same as development without an artifact repository. And I just thought it was a wonderful analogy that, you as a manufacturer, you would not consider trying to make stuff without a warehouse full of parts. It just wouldn't happen. But sometimes in software, developers might just pick up bits of things here and there and perhaps not keep a collection of what's been used. So developers are the primary user of the artifact repository, and it is a place for them to keep all of the bits of stuff that they've got. So it helps us with things like version control, and it's essentially like a library or a bill of materials for what we've got. So I mentioned the Sonatype State of Software Supply Chain report earlier on. It came out a few months ago. I wrote an article on it, which is linked in this slide, which was about the importance of having an open source policy. And it was from really that article that the idea came to myself and Derek about this particular talk, about the foundational nature of the artifact repository in the DevSecops supply chain. So in the report, we found things like in 2017, 64% of respondents said they had an open source policy, but 35% of them went on to say that they ignored it. Now, if we think back to one of the first slides where I talked about the 110.1 constraint around DevOps and security people, what tends to happen, we think, is that the security people are the ones that are setting the open source policy, and the developers are the ones that are expected to use it, consume it, and work from it. But for some reason, they aren't. So this kind of disconnect between development and security is evidenced in the statistics. It's in the data that we're seeing. So this kind of idea of security sitting on their own in an ivory tower and being very difficult to work with and being a bit of a constraint is felt. And I'm sure, and I know because I talk to security professionals, that likewise from their point of view, it doesn't feel like that at all. If we've read the Phoenix Project, you'll be familiar with the character John. The security people, it feels like they are being asked to do way too much stuff and people just don't listen to their advice. So there are two sides to every story. Other interesting parts of the software supply chain report are things like 38% of organisations had a complete bill of materials for each software application, which doesn't sound like many, really, because wouldn't you want to know what you've got in everything? Wouldn't that be a good thing? And 62% do not have meaningful controls over what components are in their software applications. So they don't know what's coming in and out of their applications. So in terms of the supply chain hygiene, to keep to that sort of manufacturing context, this is pretty dirty. It's like, we don't really know what we've got. So we don't really know whether our software is riddled with vulnerabilities. We can't be sure that we are mitigating risk. We can't really be sure about anything that's in there. I used this quote in that same article, which is from IDG, and IDG was saying this is when you need background to your open source software policy. And I just really love this, because this is the scenarios where you might need to tell people a bit more about why you've got this thing. So first one, management doesn't know how much open source software the current company uses or depends on. And I think that's common to most organisations we work with. If you ask management, how much open source software do we use, you'd probably get a pretty blank face. You might even get what's open source software back from maybe not the IT management, but some people just may not know that there are implications of using open source that aren't just about vulnerabilities. And I keep on talking about vulnerabilities, but of course there's a whole aspect of commercial license problems that rock up here around the open source space as well. Something that looks free on the face of it often isn't when it's used in certain scenarios. And there are some, very sizable cases and precedents out there of when software organisations have been charged by the open source people for being in breach of license. The next one, there are widely varying opinions on how much open source software is used. I love the fact that the word opinions in there as well, not facts, just like, I believe that there is this much open source and I believe that there's hardly any. Next one, there's an open source software rule or policy that conflicts with reality. For example, no open source software allowed, but your IT infrastructure is built on open source software. So how does that happen? Where someone states explicitly we're not having open source, and yet the whole IT infrastructure is built upon something like Linux. There are big disagreements on how the company should use open source software. So, should it be we're using free stuff in a toolchain? We're going to use components to build our core apps, our core mission critical apps. People may not be able to come to an agreement. So with all that in mind, so what we've learned about DevSecops and what we've learned about artifact repositories and software cleanliness, software hygiene, let's have a think about where the artifact repository sits in a DevOps or a DevSecops toolchain. So we use this a lot in our training, this excerpt from the DevOps Handbook, which I basically put in today because I wanted to draw your attention to a couple of pieces in it. I know there's quite a lot of words there, but the first bit is basically saying that IT operations could and probably should provide a DevOps toolchain as a shared service. And the next bit is essentially giving us a list of things that we would expect that DevOps toolchain to be able to do, including having pre-blessed security libraries and security scanning tools, which are automatically run before deployment. So none of this kind of penetration testing after the event, none of this kind of manual, let's run that tool because we've just thought about it and that application has gone live. This is about automating that testing in the CI/CD process. So this is the DevOps Loop. So as it says on the right, this is the work range for we like to represent the DevOps toolchain. We represent it as essentially a continuous release cycle, and we represent it as a loop because we feel that it needs to be recognised visually that we are not going from A to B. It's not a linear process. We're going round and round this as fast as we can. You may have seen some other ones that are like a figure of 8 on its side, and I'm not particularly keen on them personally because one side is usually dev and one side is ops. So we're forever keeping that separation between the two organisations or the two disciplines. But increasingly, I think the agreed model for a DevOps evolved organisation is to have product-centric, multifunctional, cross-functional people within a team. So we would have people with roles around things like site reliability engineering, alongside people with roles around development and roles around building things like infrastructure as code, or using code to produce the deployment pipeline or the DevOps toolchain. So we really don't want that separation. We want these blended. So this is an example DevOps loop. So I've put some examples of tools on there that typically people are using. So what I've said is that the software starts here, and it's pointing at Nexus, the artifact repository there. We start the cycle from ideation. So ideation being the point that someone comes up with a requirement, and we put that requirement into usually Jira as a user story, and it becomes part of the product backlog. But when the hands hit the keyboards and something actually happens to make that software come alive, where we want to see that start is as something is pulled from or put into the artifact repository to become part of the application code. So then we've got going to be using things like GitHub to help us manage source control and version control, and TeamCity to help us do things like the automated build. And then we've got a couple of examples of Jasmine and Selenium and various different tools that we can run as part of our CI process, and then our CD process. And then we get to the thing being live. So that feature has been deployed as part of the continuous delivery lifecycle, and it's now effectively in operation. And what we're saying there is we do not want any vulnerabilities there. We do not want any vulnerabilities in live. So we need to catch them right back at the start, and software starts at the artifact repository. A couple of other tools and things on there, just some collaboration tools. I've mentioned Confluence and I think Slack already. SharePoint's obviously very popular around the world. And then we've got some monitoring tools. So just a quick note on the monitoring tools. What we're really wanting to do with monitoring is not just remediate problems, but also measure value and measure value outcomes. And you'll see that realization links back to ideation. So what we're saying there is what we want to be able to do is say, that thing that we wrote in Jira that we said would do this has or has not achieved what its value goal was. And therefore, we're going to take a learning opportunity and push that back into our backlog as either a revision to that thing that we did, or we'll kill it, or it'll drive us to do something new and related. So, as I said, keep on going around that loop. So, just going back actually where I was finishing here, really, software starts here. So this is where the software starts, at the artifact repository, and we definitely don't want any vulnerabilities here in operation. So we have to remove any bugs, any vulnerabilities, or any misunderstandings about what a software license might mean as early as possible in this part of the toolchain. So Sonatype make a product, which is our particular preferred product in this space, which helps us do just this. So we can build into the integrated development environment or IDE of a developer the ability to say that thing that you're pulling out of the artifact repository, that version of it is not great. Can you use this version instead? And you can find it here in the artifact repository. So that helps the developer. It helps the management and the security people get a bill of materials of what they have got in their software. So all those people that were saying, my opinion is that we've got 30% open source software in our organization, we can start to address those conversations, and we can start to have some surety in the security team that the risk has been mitigated because they understand what they've got with what vulnerabilities and things have been changed. So we can understand the current vulnerabilities and risks. We can configure health checks to run daily, so we've got a real-time view of it, automated all the time. And we can, as I said, we can integrate it into the tool chain, so we can have it either at the developer IDE level. You could, if you didn't want to feel like you might be interrupting your developers, you could have it in your CI or your CD pipeline, so you could break a build off the back of it. Sonatype are constantly getting the latest news on what things are dangerous or not, and we can learn what our developers are likely to be using and using. And it's very, very accurate. So that was my explanation as to why we consider the artifact repository to be the key foundational element of a DevSecops toolchain. Derek mentioned this at the start. I wanted to mention it as well. So DevSecops Days is coming up at the back end of this month after the DevOps Enterprise Summit in London. We'd love to see you there. I will be there. I am on the organising committee. I am also speaking in the morning. Chris Roberts, as you can see there, is the opening keynote. We've also got Mark Schwartz from Amazon now, used to be CIO of US Customs, as the closing keynote. So it promises to be a really great day. So if you're planning to be at DUS or in London around that time, it would be absolutely fantastic to see you there. So thank you so much for your time and attention today. And I think we'll be going to the Slack channel next. Is that right, Derek?
Yeah. Yes and no. So as the schedule works out, first of all, Helen, thanks for your presentation. It was awesome to view. We were also working in the background on our next session, which I want you to hang out a little bit for. I'll mention that as we move forward here. But one of the things that I wanted to go back and touch on from your presentation, you said management doesn't know how much open source is being used, and sometimes opinions on that vary. Earlier this morning we saw Barry Schneider at Fannie Mae talking about, they had 800 or so open source components approved to use in their environment before they started working with us, and then once they had, and they started analyzing that their application portfolio, they found out that they had 13,000 open source components across their portfolio. And today they have over 19,000 open source components actively cataloged in their environment. Now, of course, they're using those multiple times, throughout their environment. So just 19,000 unique artifacts. What's been your experience when you go into these clients and having that conversation about, do you really know how many are there, and how does that conversation go depending on who you're talking to?
People simply don't know the vast majority of the time. It's one of those kind of blank faces, and when you ask kind of without solutionizing for them how they might try and find out that sort of information, they start talking about people walking around and talking to people with clipboards, and then they kind of realize that actually, who are they going to ask? They're going to ask the developers, and are the developers going to know or have the time to really tell them? So people don't know. And then the other thing that shocks people, I think, is we've had instances with some of our customers where we've run scans of software that they have from a third party. So it's not even software that they've built themselves, but they can see vulnerable artifacts in that software made by other third parties like Betfair, for example, and stuff. So it's quite shocking and a little scary. And then we wonder sometimes why people don't act upon this stuff sooner. And I think there is an element of maybe not ostrich about it, kind of like sticking your head in the sand, but there are so many other things to do that this gets lost, and it becomes about kind of what's the risk of actually having a breach? Will that actually happen or not? And sometimes it almost takes the breach to happen for people to kind of really think about it. But as I said, this is about mitigating risk, really. So having software hygiene, and as you say, understanding, and what you were just saying about those numbers about Fannie Mae, they weren't really surprising at all. I mean, they probably got a bit of a surprise, but that's exactly the kind of what we're seeing is people just don't really know.
Yeah, so the other thing, this is a topic John Willis and I have been talking a lot about as we've intersected at different conferences over the last couple of months, is there's kind of this somewhat surprise factor if someone actually does the analysis and finds out how many open source components they have in their environment. But when you look at containers and people using more Docker, people using Kubernetes or other container orchestration platforms, and they're rolling out containers upon containers. If you went to these same organizations and said, how many different containers do you have out in production or configured in your environment or available for use in dev, test, or ops? Do you think you would get the same answer of, I don't really know, we weren't paying attention?
I'm not sure. Do you think people are more likely to put something in like Dockley or something that will give them a management view of their containers? I kind of feel like people are generally architecting that more up front. I think part of what you're maybe alluding to is that this is part of a habit, like a historical habit that people have had where, and partly because they haven't had the ability to do it, that bill of materials has been virtually impossible to really extract, and developers have just gone on and kept on making changes. But I think from my observations, and I think containers are still really, really new. In all honesty, only a small proportion of our customers are experimenting with them. But I think, as with cloud, most people that are going into that journey are going into it with their eyes open and saying, we don't want this infrastructure to get out of control. So we will put a management process and some management tools in there in front of it.
Yeah, it was hypothetical conversation between John and I, but I just thought as the topic came up, I would share it. So
something to put in your state of software supply chain survey next year then, who's managing their containers and cloud effectively.
So speaking of the DevSecOps community survey that we ran, as we were going through the agenda, as you were speaking, we noticed that we had a gap between 2:30 and 3 o'clock when James Wickett was going to get on live. And so we said, do we just stop the conversation or do we fill it with something? So I'll give you the option of going off to Slack or staying here with us. James is on the channel. Mark Miller's on the channel. You guys can unmute yourselves as you'd like, but we're going to put up the slide deck from the DevSecOps community survey, and we're going to spend some time kind of running through it as just a panel. So Helen, if you'd like to join us for this, we'd love to have you on, and we'll walk through it, and we'll spend up until 3 o'clock until James is set to go live, we'll get going here. So Helen will be in Slack, but we're going to ask her to participate. Helen, are you up for it?
It's quite late here in the UK, but I can't really say no to such a nice invitation, can I? Yes, I'd be delighted to.
Yeah, well, Mark just walked in the room. I appreciate it. I do know it's late. It's hopefully you had a snack before you came and joined us to get on here. So hi, Helen.
Hiya.
And James, we see you. James, you're muted.
Yep.
Let's get you. Hi, James. Okay. So
Helen, I'm glad you're here. Keep it real here.
I'll do my best.
Yeah, we can't have an all-guy panel as well. So John Willis has trained me extremely well that no all-male panels can happen. So so we're even
I was thinking adding in the Europe flair here is what we need.
Exactly. Okay, so let's for those of you that are hanging on here, we're going to go through the survey. I'll give you a little background first, and then we'll show some of the survey results here, just to make sure everyone can see the slides up here. And I can't see I can't see my green room, so I'm hoping everything's okay there. I'll open Slack just to make sure. So so let's walk through some of the survey results. So this year, 2,076 people took the survey. So we've run this survey 4 or 5 times now. Each time there's about 2,000 people that are participating. We asked people in the survey to self-identify their kind of DevOps maturity level. So 25% of the people said they have highly mature DevOps practices. 49% are, kind of on their journey somewhere toward highly mature, and 26% had immature, non-existent practices.
You want to talk about these as we go, or are you?
I'm going to go through some of the background of who took the survey, and then we'll get to the results of who was in there. So cross industry participation, banking and financial services and technology were kind of the biggies in there. But we also saw telco, government, education, retail, etc.
So I can only see a little screen, I think, with the slides on it. Should I be able to see a bigger screen with the slides?
Have you clicked into that? Let me go see. I'm going to run.
Oh, no, I've got it. I think. Okay. Yeah. Sorry.
Okay, we'll make sure that everyone is seeing the big screen out there.
Hey, and Derek, can I add just a thought on that first slide? Like, how did you feel that the number of people that are either on their way to DevOps or already kind of established DevOps practices? Did you feel like that was a pretty good uptick from previous years, or is this kind of like just a continual trend?
It's a good question. Let me go through and just fix the. I think I wasn't focused on the slide. Let's see if we can fix that for folks. Hopefully that fixed it. So we're now keeping on that screen. So yeah, so interesting. Year over year, I think it stayed pretty constant. I think I think it might have been 26% if I go back to that slide. Yeah, so it was 25% highly mature practices this year. I think last year it was 26%. So we're still kind of in the same ballpark range. We didn't see a lot, going into the highly mature area. And I think the 49% may have been 50% last year when we ran it. So pretty consistent year over year on that. So Mark is just coming back in to join us. So 27% had a DevOps specific title. 20% were developers, 13% architects. Very few security people took the survey this year. So when we look at the survey results, 3% IT or AppSec. You'll notice most of these are developer-centric roles within the organization. Most organizations, or 50%, had over 100 developers. So these are fairly sizable organizations that went through. And just a slide that everyone seems to share from the survey results, as I've seen various people present it, was that 48% of developers know security is important, but don't have time to spend on it. So let's get into some of the survey results here and kind of what we saw, and then we can start the kind of roundabout discussion. So we asked people, and this was a really interesting play on the survey results and the kind of mature, non-mature DevOps practices, is that where are you putting automated security in the development lifecycle? And the yellow bars show those that had no DevOps practice, and the purple bars show those that have mature DevOps practices. So at the far right there, you see that throughout the process, automated security is implemented 338% more in DevOps shops, which was, I think was, a very telling perspective of, is DevSecOps real? Are people implementing security throughout the lifecycle? Yes, and considerably more. And then I'll quickly show, so we also looked at 2017 versus 2018 in this to see, if you were a mature DevOps shop last year and you're a mature DevOps shop this year, have you increased the percentage of or the presence of automated security throughout the lifecycle? And you'll see we had bumps of 7 to 10% in each of these categories, and throughout the life cycle by 15%. So just commentary from James, Helen, Mark on kind of what you see in these two slides. James, you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. I think this is good. Like we're seeing, I was kind of asking that question at the beginning because I feel like there is more market adoption. There is more people that are thinking about this, you know, and I like that we're asking the question throughout the different stages, because sometimes I think it's easy to sort of hone in on one phase, and especially like when DevOps first started, like everyone was kind of really eager to do configuration management. I think with security, similarly, like, right, just kind of honing in on one phase of the pipeline, depending on where you sit. But I like that it's throughout the process, and I think we sometimes have this idea like security has always sort of thought thoroughly throughout the process. Like, if I do it all, like, then I can finally check that box. But I think we're saying, like, are you implementing and instrumenting any pieces of this? And yeah, I'm excited by this and to see this kind of continue to trend upwards. I mean, 15% is a pretty good tick year over year, and to see just all in all, just generally everything kind of increasing. So to me, this sort of represents what we're seeing kind of out there in the world as is. But it's great to have some numbers behind that.
Yeah, Helen, are you seeing a similar uptick or feeling an overall uptick in the clients that you're working with, bringing more automated security into the life cycle kind of year over year?
I wouldn't describe it as an uptick. I think people are starting to get to it. It's been a lot slower. I think, as I said at the end of my talk, this kind of, I'm always surprised how often we show somebody how many potential problems there are and how slowly how slow they are to react to it. Security always seems to be the last thing that gets put into the DevOps toolchain.
Yeah.
But I do remember this slide from last year, and I do remember really enjoying. I think we looked at a couple of years compared to each other before, and what I quite liked was you can see, and I know the final one is throughout the process, but you can kind of see the shifting left. You can see the bars getting bigger the further we go left over time, which I think is a good indicator of people realizing that the earlier they do this, the better.
Yeah.
The thing that I always think about when I see a chart like this is, how do people self-identify themselves as mature DevOps organizations? Does that change, and is that a relationship to the bar too? I think it would be hard to take an internal look and say we're a mature DevOps organization when most people don't have the sense that the DevOps is an entire process. It's not just a CI/CD pipeline.
Yeah, and I, somewhat telling. I think we're going to get to some of the survey results later that kind of give people's reflection on what DevSecOps means, how they've integrated, or how comfortable they are with their security posture. So kind of the next slide up in the survey results was this one that, we asked, not only did we ask, are you using automated security throughout the life cycle or at different stages, but what are you using? So web application firewalls, which we haven't heard a lot about today and yesterday, container security, which we've heard a heck of a lot about through almost all the customer presentations we've had talk about some level of container security, open source governance, clearly with Sonatype and our automated open source governance solutions. No surprise, you're hearing a lot about that at the Nexus user conference today and yesterday. So James, going back to you, when we look at this, you spend a lot of time in the web application firewall community. Surprises or not so surprised at the survey results here?
It's Signal Sciences. This is where we kind of sit right at the web application firewall layer, putting kind of real-time metrics back in the hands of developers and operations folks, right? So we really try to sit in that, and so I was surprised by the kind of this number just for overall adoption, but it is one of the longer standing technologies kind of on the board here. Like it's been around for a long time. The funny thing about web application firewalls is they're generally the most hated technology inside of an organization, which we we've come to learn and see kind of how people are dealing with that. But I believe Forrester 2 years ago said it was like 16 or 18%. It was a really low number of people were actually happy or satisfied with their web application firewall, right? And most people like just, and it was the lowest of all technology spectrum. And so I think that's really interesting. It is good to see that people haven't really abandoned the technology, and we're seeing people that are running like RASPs or next generation WAFs, or coming up with ways to kind of implement still in their stack in the cloud type manner, or containers or whatever. So I think it's encouraging, but the irony isn't lost on me of kind of like how it's the most adopted yet most hated. So.
Yeah, the other thing I find interesting, if you go back and think, like, this isn't security people that are taking this survey. This is DevOps and developers, right? And like, what are, if you're not in security and you weren't the people buying these tools necessarily, right? Some DevOps shops or DevSecOps shops are the buying organization. They say, yeah, I know we have WAFs out there, but if you look at what I know we're using container security, we're using open source governance, but it's the kind of non-DevOps shops, the purple bars that are like, all these technologies are probably being used, but the developers, you probably aren't touching them. They're like, I don't know, 8%, man. DAS, static, analysis. Maybe our security team's using that, right? But
yeah, like web application firewalls have kind of ridden the compliance bandwagon. So like they were sort of said, hey, you need to put those in to get compliance. But also SAST and DAST and even probably SCA, you could make a good argument for is part of like PCI compliance standards and other frameworks. So it's interesting that like, and maybe it's the coupling of like how a lot of people kind of did this, what I consider kind of an ill-conceived idea in kind of modern times, but taking their WAF and putting it on their CDN or their caching layer, and sort of said, well, I know we have that Akamai thing, and we click the add a WAF on their button, but likely they don't know anything about the kind of dynamic application security scanners that they're using, or static code analysis, or any of that kind of stuff. So I think yeah, you're right. Like that could be it, right? If we didn't have a lot of security people filling this thing out, they may not know as much on the right-hand side, because those have kind of stuck inside of the engineering wheelhouse, where like web app firewalls kind of naturally cross that generally security and operations kind of Venn diagram there.
Just, Helen, any patterns that you see that are reflective or not reflective of what the answers were here?
Actually, I was having a slightly different thought, which was, I don't think we do this at the moment, or I don't think you do this as part of the survey, but I'd also be interested in understanding what application security services people are buying. So James just mentioned Akamai, which was the one that was predominantly going through my head, but how much people are buying Akamai type solutions or penetration tests or traditional, and James is much more the expert than me, but what other services people buy in the security space.
Yeah,
it's interesting too, Helen, because I'm glad that you're on the call. It seems to me that this type of question changes depending on what region of the world you're in. When we're talking about, James, you're shaking your head, so I think you've seen that too. Like if you go to Southeast Asia, or you go to Europe or United States, it's going to be different because of the cultural perception. James?
Yeah, and I think just the also depending, I was just talking with some folks that kind of do a lot of things in the oil and gas industry, and they're just with all the regulations and other things like that, their ability to, or their the way that they're adopting cloud has been considerably different than people that have kind of been greenfielded type stuff, or stuff that's been kind of built up in the last 10, 15 years. So whereas Helen, your point, right, is like we in the modern kind of building your IT apps, right, you're starting to just pull in a bunch of services. Well, most of those boxes or those lines on that chart could have been represented with like hardware or large expensive kind of like software licensing type deals in the past. And so now services are kind of upsetting each of those plays, or some of them, right?
Right, and things like data power, where does that fit into that sort of thing?
Yeah. So, the fun thing about the community survey is, we're not the only one that develops the questions. So James, Helen, and others all played into kind of what are the questions that we ask. So we like to keep a lot of the same questions year over year for that consistency, but also building in as we think about what else do we need to build into the survey to kind of reflect the results. So let me jump to.
And I do like how every year we kind of think of like, oh, here's some new things that kind of sparked us. Like, we would really like to know the answer to that question. So
yeah. Hassan Yassar from CMU also threw in a number of really good questions this year as well. So outnumbered 100 to 1. I mean, this has been pretty consistent. I think I saw James at LastCon, maybe 4 years ago, present this ratio. And I don't think it's changing. And for me, it kind of points to the need for automation, because if you're always outnumbered, the only way to keep up, is through automated security practices that enable you to keep pace. But I'm going to, before we all comment, I'm going to move to this slide, which was an interesting result: rate your cybersecurity preparedness. And this kind of gets back to Mark's comment about, like, how do people perceive themselves as mature DevOps organizations or not? But when we ask people, the mature DevOps practices are yellow. The no DevOps practice is the orangish color, red color. So mature DevOps practices felt twice as prepared as the non-DevOps practices. Helen, I know you might be seeing this for the first time, today, certainly. But why do you think we saw this dynamic play out in the survey of, I feel better prepared if I have a mature DevOps practice? Where do you think that stems from?
So in my presentation, I talked about this word DevSecops and where it's kind of come from and why it's important, and the fact that it does feel in the DevOps world that actually security was a bit of the last thought, the kind of last thing that came into town, if you like. And I kind of alluded to it earlier when we talked about when people are actually committing to do this stuff, and I said that security seems to be, when people are doing a CI or CD pipeline, security is the last bit that comes in. Mm-hmm. So a mature DevOps practice will hopefully have got to that point where they are having conversations about how to automate security. They'll have been doing things like looking at that DevOps Handbook excerpt that I showed in my presentation, that talks about having pre-blessed security libraries and having automated security scanning tools in your deployment pipeline. So those guys will be having those conversations, and hopefully understand what DevSecops is and helping break that security constraint that you were just talking about. So one of our customers has very effectively done that. They're a relatively small customer. They've got a few hundred people, a couple of hundred people in IT. They've been experimenting with Agile for about 18 months probably now, and they're up to about 3 or 4 Agile teams, and they got one of their 3 or 4 security people to liaise basically with one of the Agile teams. So he spent a lot of time sitting with them, and the cross-pollination that they acknowledge that they've achieved means that guy is now going off to another Agile team. They feel that they've brought the dev and test people up so far in that team the time they've spent together. So that, I think, is why people are feeling more prepared if they are doing more DevOpsy type things.
Mm-hmm. Mark or James?
I'm always like the detractor on this kind of stuff, because I wonder if that large yellow might not be self-deception. And I say that in all seriousness. It's like, okay, we're cool, we're doing DevOps now, and there's this perception that they're more secure that doesn't necessarily make them more secure. The other side of that coin too is conscious incompetency. A really good DevOps shop is going to be conscious of where they're incompetent. Mm-hmm. And maybe that's where the yellow is coming from.
Okay. All right, Mark, I'm an optimist, so I'm gonna come at you here. Listen, what do people think about DevOps, right? People think DevOps is automation, right? And instrumentation, feedback loops. I think those are three things that sort of resonate no matter whether you kind of buy into the lean background or CI/CD or whatever. But those are some common themes. So if we just take those three, and then when you think about what do people think about when they mean cybersecurity preparedness, so a lot of that is just their ability to respond. And so if they can trust in the automation and they're able to move faster and be more agile, not in the agile development sense, but agile in just like the ability of quick response sense, or they're able to they have more instrumentation, so they have more visibility inside their stack where they never had before. They know what libraries of things they've actually baked into their code, which before they couldn't have answered that with a prayer, right? Or they could say, what part of their sites are under attack, in the production runtime. It's not perfect, but better. And then just the ability to know that like we know how to make code changes to our site like much more rapidly than we've ever done before, and like we don't have these monthly or quarterly or whatever releases. Like we're releasing all the time, so like we can respond properly whenever we do have any sort of incidents. So I think like it's a continual growing of this. And Derek, I liked your kind of tie-in with the previous slide, because we don't have enough of those security people. Like we can't fill more people down there. Like the industry is at capacity. The only way we're going to fix this problem is the same way operations fixed this problem whenever they kind of came out with DevOps, is like moving developers down to the operation level and kind of working together to kind of fix this stuff together. We're already doing it, and people are already kind of coming up with this of taking developers and moving them into the security practices to add those instrumentation, feedback loops, and automation. So I think it's good. I'm an optimist.
I'm kind of upset that you're implying that I'm a pessimist.
Well, see, that's the trick. That's the trick.
It's the southern way you went about it.
You came through the back door on that.
No, and just to make a good panel and build on your controversy here, I'm going to side with James as well. That I remember
showing the light side.
Back to we were at a DevSecops meetup at Fannie Mae, and their head of application development said, when the Struts vulnerability was first announced back in March of last year, one of the big ones in March last year, he said, we knew we needed to get an updated version of that Struts library into production. And it wasn't like, here's an emergency process that we need to run through. He said, from ideation into production is a 2-day process for us, because everything is a 2-day process for us. So when we had this new business requirement to move a new version of Struts into production, we took 2 days to do this. Like they just ran it through their standard process, and this kind of like rate your preparedness. And kind of as James said, like, deploying a new update to software is something that in a DevOps pipeline you do all the time. So, in essence, there should be, in many ways, no difference to roll out a new version of a library or component or what have you. Now, Struts isn't always that easy. Everyone will argue, but just to hear, his perspective on, I didn't have a security issue. I just had a business requirement, and here's how we roll it out. And this was our standard practice. That it was that kind of that comfort level that he was communicating. So we are at 3 o'clock, and James is on with us to present.
We can just keep doing this. I kind of like going at this panel here. So
yeah, so we filled a good half hour. Helen, I can't thank you enough for staying on late for us in Europe, and we do appreciate that. I know you're in the Slack channel as well, so if there are questions brewing there, I did put the link into DevSecOpsDays.com so that people can find the London registration page. So hopefully we can get a few viewers registered for that. And I know Mark will be over there with you for that one.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. So James, let's
Thanks. Sorry, thanks guys. See you later.
Thanks.
All right.
Helen. Bye.
Thanks, Helen.
I'm gonna take my squeaky office door there. So let me see. I need to stop sharing on this side, which I've done. I'm gonna focus on James. So James, I know we can see you and hear you.
Okay.
And you want to share your slides
Yep.
so we can get those up. So James and I, James and everyone in the DevOps community have been working together for years. If you don't know James, he's head of research at Signal Sciences. Currently, he does DevOps training on lynda.com. He wrote the Gauntlet open source project for application security testing. He co-founder or helped start DevOps Days Austin, LastCon, and a whole bunch of other things on his very long resume in this DevOps community, and also was one of the original gang that started All Day DevOps with us. So James, enough of an introduction to help us start down this path here to DevOps Enlightenment. All
right on. Can you hear me and see the slides okay?
I can. We're good to go.
Okay. Hey, thanks Derek for the great introduction there, and that was kind of a fun panel. And I think we'll talk about some of the things that I sort of have taken this presentation, and it's sort of me cataloging things that I've seen going on in the industry, which I think will, and most of it's just from observation and rhetoric, I guess, and not as many hard stats, but hopefully it'll be helpful for y'all. So. I work over at Signal Sciences. We provide application security defense for cloud and containers and anything that's kind of delivering a web application firewall or web application. So we kind of compete against like web application firewalls and RASPs and that nature. We have some big customers from Netflix to more. I think we have a bunch on our website you can check out if you're interested. So I also do a lot of stuff at DevOps Days Austin. On lynda.com, like Derek mentioned. So, all right. So I'd like to give you guys a summary up front, and then we'll kind of unpack it from there. So I think we're seeing that DevOps is changing. We need to make sure we don't lose our way as security is kind of brought in. Another premise here is that security is in crisis, but security at forward-leaning shops have found kind of the new way, and I'll kind of catalog those here. And so we're going to juxtapose old ways and new ways of doing security in DevOps. And I have a lot of slides, so I'm going to go a little bit fast, but I will provide the slides if you hit me an email. My email is at the end of the presentation. And so the questions I have is security, can security's industry rise to the demands and the high speed of DevOps? Is DevOps going to be able to handle all the baggage that we security people bring to the table? I don't know, I hope not, and hopefully security won't destroy the DevOps culture. But that's to be determined. We'll have to see. So first, let's start with DevSecOps deep thoughts. I thought we could define what DevSecOps means. So if anybody's familiar with Jack Handey, I borrowed this actually from DevOps deep thoughts from Josh Zimmerman. So this is a meme of a meme. So I apologize if it's not nearly as clever as the original or the subsequent version. But here we go. Maybe in order to understand DevSecOps, we have to look at the word itself. Basically, it's made up of these three separate words: de, viseco, and ps. What do these words mean? It's a mystery, and that's why so is DevSecOps. Whenever someone asks me to define DevSecOps, I usually think for a minute. Then I spin around and pin the guy's arm behind his back. Now who is asking the questions? Well, those are my attempt at comedy here. So hopefully you found those funny. But big thanks to Josh Zimmerman and of course the real Jack Handey. So and I did find this one I thought is helpful for all of us, no matter your thoughts on DevOps or DevSecOps. But many people don't realize that playing dead can help not only with bears but also at important business meetings. Okay, no truer thing, right? Okay, so I'd like to just give you my journey and just talk about like where I've been and kind of where I'm coming through. And kind of the path that I've been on. So my first big company job was at a web and e-commerce company. I was doing about $1 billion in sales, and we had brutal on-call rotations. We'd had these deployment windows that were supposed to be a few hours that would end up being 24 plus hours. It was all waterfall. And it was very painful, but through that adversity and problems, like, we had good friendships born because we were all suffering together. In 2007, I went for a startup that was doing Amazon Cloud type stuff. Then I learned a little bit about failure and happiness and how I wanted to live my life. And then I had the old team that I was working with kind of started a new initiative at the same big company, but for doing cloud back in 2010. And so I went and joined them. At the same time, we had found the DevOps message. Being in Austin, there was an early cloud camp, or I think it was an ops camp, and all of the who's who of the DevOps community today, was there at that event, and we sort of were like, oh, this is great. We totally will do this, and we had kind of clearance to run with cloud budget, and we just sort of said, let's do DevOps as well because that makes sense, right? And so we did infrastructure as code. We weren't doing CD at the time. That wasn't a big thing as much back then, but we were doing like daily deploys, and we were delivering value way faster than we'd ever done anywhere else inside the company. And we delivered 4 SaaS products in 2 years. And at that time in 2011, that was like blowing people's minds inside of our big company. Around that time, I found kind of the rugged software movement. I was able to meet Gene Kim in a bar, started the Gauntlet project, and then a little bit later joined Signal Sciences. And through that time, I learned, and through the DevOps movement, really there needed to be a compassion for ops, because we faced this, and we just talked about this in the slide, right? You had every 10 developers, you had 1 operations person. And so you had this labor inequity, which didn't just stop there, right? It also permeated the rest of the IT ranks, and we see this with dev to ops to security, 110 to 1, right? The problem we were just talking about in the previous panel. I still kind of remained optimistic. I thought, well, security can kind of find its way, sort of like ops did, because ops sort of has had a revitalization over the last decade. And I remember our roots of friendship. So this is Patrick Dubois, who's the guy who coined the term DevOps originally. We consider him the godfather of DevOps, and also John Willis, who's no stranger to this community, but both are really instrumental in kind of building out the kind of DevOps, especially from day zero. And then I started thinking about our team that was building all these applications, these cloud apps over together at our big company, and here we all are. We met up many years later, and we were just going out for a movie. But I still remember, this is the type of thing that really matters to us. And Patrick Dubois said this, and I believe the year he wrote this was in 2011, 2012. There was IT Cutter Journal on DevOps Succeeding in the Enterprise, and Patrick Dubois was like the guest editor for it, and we had a little write-up for my good friend Ernest Muller had a write-up, and kind of our success story was in there as well. But in there it said, culture is the most important aspect to DevOps succeeding in the enterprise. And I think that we shouldn't go away from that. I think it's really easy to get stuck in the tooling and all the other stuff, and I'm going to talk about some of the ways we're seeing security progress down the path of enlightenment. But whenever we really look at it, culture, we can't leave that behind. And I sort of think about culture in a very lunar type of way. I have back when I started kind of thinking about this, I had a 3 or 4-year-old daughter, and she was really excited about the moon, right? Every time we would see the moon, she'd be, Dad, there's the moon. It's full moon, half moon. I started installing apps on my phone, so I could tell the phases of the moon. Her window kind of would set, and we would go out there and look at it. Sometimes I'd pull her out. And I realized that I had started to change myself and my culture. The inside of my heart, I had changed because I was driving home from a business trip once, and I called my wife, and I was like, "Hey, the moon is really, really big right now, and it's some phase of whatever, right?" And I said, "You need to wake up, Lydia, have her go out there and take it out and see it." And she's like, "Oh, kids are asleep, not going to do that." But I was really excited about it, and I realized that excitement and that had sort of infected me, and there was kind of a culture that had moved in, and so I think these are the 4 keys that I like to think of for culture. So you have mutual understanding. We started having shared language. We had shared views about what's important. The tooling, like the apps and stuff like that we'd put on our phones. So I think that's those are helpful ways to think about this. And we need to think about DevSecOps not as something new or some wholesale change, but it's the extension of DevOps culture into and for the inclusion of security within that. And I think that's important to get. Like we're not reinventing the wheel here. We're just bringing security in to a place where arguably they should have been all along, or kind of belonged in early on, but we sort of we didn't bring them around first go around. But I think DevSecOps is really kind of helping them get the understanding of what the DevOps movement, and that it's also includes security as well. Well, this is good because I find that security is in crisis, and this is one of the premise of the whole talk, right? We see one of the luminaries inside of the security industry, Stephen Beloven, who wrote the famous book on firewalls in the late 90s, recently wrote a book called Thinking Security. In that, he says companies are spending a great deal on security, but we read of all these cyber-related attacks all the time, and something is wrong. The root of the problem is twofold. We're protecting the wrong things, and we're hurting productivity in the process. So not even doing the right type of work, and we're hurting the rest of the business all around. So it's a pretty bad statement for the state of security. If you like Mr. Robot, hope you do. But security, right? It's important. There's this other quote that really resonated with me in a very serious way when I read this. This is a book called The Tangled Web. Michael Zalewski. It's all about browsers and browser security and web application security. But the first chapter kind of catalogs security throughout the last 6 decades or so, and talks about how the 60s and 70s and the focus on cryptography and all that stuff. But there's a churn in the book, and it's a point in kind of the mid 90s, and he kind of makes this statement. He says, security by risk assessment introduces a dangerous fallacy that structured inadequacy is almost as good as adequacy, and that underfunded security efforts plus risk management are just about as good as properly funded security work. Now, that should bother anybody who's an engineer or a developer who has come from the idea of creating high quality code, right? Because what he's saying here is that we can write sloppy code. We can do, we don't have to do the engineering work that we used to have to do. We can just put actuarial science behind this. We can do management of risks by insurance policies, accept the risks or whatever, and that's just about as good. And that really hit a chord with me, and I was disturbed by the fact that that this was kind of the turn in the industry. And it really, it struck me as this is the things that I had seen throughout the industry of people doing this kind of activity and sort of giving up on the idea of higher quality, more secure type of code. And I think this is cataloged in the recently released Agile Application Security book. It says many security teams work with a worldview where their goal is to inhibit change as much as possible. And I've had this said to me where security prefers a system powered off and unplugged. So developers think that security doesn't even want systems to run. That's how disconnected from reality they are. Also, I hear security people always claiming that those stupid developers, which we just saw in the presentation for the DevSecOps report, almost 50% of developers know that security is important. They want to do something, they just don't know what to do. Well, it's not that they're stupid. It's just there's just so many paths or whatever. But we kind of have this real antagonistic relationship between security and developers. So I think security has to change or die. So I have this kind of long quote from a web application firewall vendor that I was doing some research early on in the Signal Sciences days. But the paper says every aspect of managing WAFs is an ongoing process. It's the antithesis of set it and forget it technology. It's the real point of this research is to maximize value from your WAF. You need to go in with everyone's eyes open of the effort required to get and keep the WAF running productively. They go on to say you need 1 or 2 headcount just to run the WAF. So it's a questionable piece of technology in the beginning. Now you're sinking even more money into it and services and people to keep all these rules updated and stuff. So it's a real messy thing. And for an industry where we don't even have enough people to fill the jobs that are open, it's a very disconnected from reality that the businesses face whenever they're trying to deliver their software. So I like how Rich Mogul says a large percentage of the companies in the expo floor will not be here in 5 years. He said this at RSA 2017, so I think that's really important. And we see that the world has changed. I, for one, like the new OSI model. Like, this is a lot easier for me to remember. I always got confused in the old one. So, so remembering, like, we are kind of consuming software and services everywhere we look. And we look at things like serverless, and we see where this is sort of changing the footprint of and the attack surface of applications. And the definition of serverless, you'll kind of, excuse kind of some of the asterisks and kind of the things here, but it says serverless encourages functions as deploy units and run as one-time read-only containers, coupled with third-party services that allow running end-to-end applications without worrying about system operation. And, there's some bits in there that aren't 100% true, but, if you kind of can stick with that, like it's mostly true, right? And security is moving people from or serverless is moving people from where they were spending so much money and having so much waste and incurring all this waste. And this is our evolution from hardware to serverless, where VMs kind of got us closer, and now serverless, we're just consuming and paying for the compute that we actually use, or the usage that we're actually that we need for our actual application. So we're tying performance and function to compute, which is really a really great place to be. And it also shifts our story. So now we're no longer thinking about doing security at all the different inheritance layers. There's still pieces of that for sure in the libraries and stuff you pull in. But what about at the application security layer? Like, that's where most of the stuff moves, right? Like, you're sort of trusting the provider to provide a lot of the other type of things. And I remember whenever we first started talking about rugged, it's been many years now, but how security kind of has all this like cost and negativity, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. It's kind of toxic in a lot of organizations, to where you start thinking about things like rugged, or kind of some of the DevSecOps language that we use nowadays is like, it's a verification of quality, it's showing known benefits, it's very positive, it's affirming. And so I really think DevOps is the kind of the new way for security. It's the traveling companion for security, and it might just be the only way for security to manage to survive pretty well. The State of the DevOps report from 2016 says high performers spend 50% less time remediating security issues than low performers. High-performing organizations achieve quality by incorporating security and security teams into the overall delivery process. So this leads us to the new path, and I want to spend the next half of the talk just sort of going through what I think is the old way and the new way, and give you some ideas for some places to look for some more ideas as you kind of go through this. And we'll break these down one by one as we go. So there's the old path and new path. So let's start. First one is embrace secrecy. The new one is create feedback loops. So Rich Smith, former director of security over at Etsy, says a security team who embraces openness about what it does and why spreads understanding. And I think runtime is one of the most important places to create feedback loops. And this is detecting not just like OWASP top 10 stuff, but also things that really matter. So account takeover attempts, or parts or portions of your site that are under attack that give you understanding about the payloads people are trying to use against you. What are the most likely vectors of attacks? Anything that's sensitive to your application that could be misused or abused. Any business logic, those would all fit in that place, right? So, oh, sweet. Hopefully my animated GIF. This is my only one, I promise, but this is kind of the state of the industry right now, because most people can't even answer the question of like, are you under attack right now? Where are you under attack? And this is, apologies for the Signal Sciences screenshots in here, but I feel like we have a good product to kind of show this value proposition here. But old ways, looking at logs or Splunk or whatever to try to figure out and do some sort of analysis through post-event type analysis, and say like, okay, people were trying to attack us, or we may have blocked it, may not have, we don't know. Where Signal Sciences is doing kind of real-time monitoring and is able to detect and stop attacks as they're coming in. So here we see like we have OWASP type stuff, but we have different types of scanners that are coming in, and this is just a small screenshot of our stuff, but we do all that account takeover, abuse, and misuse stuff as well. But and I had this slide that was in my RSA conference deck, and I thought I would just put this in here. So as you're looking at this part of the pipeline, and you're looking at like, how do I add a feedback loop for my operation runtime, and I want to move it back to the developers or to operations and security folks, like you can add runtime defense tooling. So you can do something like If you need to do something open source, you don't have any money or whatever, like that's fine, like mod security and the Elk stack, and that gives you some application insight monitoring. If you can do paid, you can do something like Signal Sciences for like a next-gen WAF or RASP option. There's also Contrast or Brevity. But one thing that I think is like good to avoid in the modern world of development is like we spent a decent amount of time, and I have this blog article I wrote that I should link in here, but it's called "Oops, I WAFed my cache." We kind of had this kind of ill-conceived notion of taking our web application firewall and application security defense solution and then putting it all the way up in the CDN tier. And there's a number of reasons that's bad. I won't get into them here, but if you find yourself doing that, like you should really kind of reconsider that. Most people are kind of pulling that level of defense closer and closer to the applications. So that's when people talk about RASP or next generation web application firewall, that's exactly what they're talking about. Okay, second piece here is just pass audit. So we used to think like, let's just get this thing done, but what if compliance could actually add value? And so that's the new way. Compliance can add value. So make sure you understand auditors. I won't go through all this, but PCI and all the frameworks, they're reasonably good, but you just got to decouple all the waterfall bits, and you got to find auditors that are able to work with you on that. The Agile Application Security book has a great chapter on this, a great couple of chapters on this, and can be really helpful for you, especially if you're kind of going to bat with some auditors or trying to figure out how to approach this. But deploys can be treated as standard or routine changes that have been pre-approved by management and that don't require any heavyweight change review meetings. So that's a very helpful concept. I think separation of duties is this thing that we've always kind of built in. We're not launching nukes, right? Like we're making software changes, something that's and competent people who wrote the software are making the changes. So I think as we put all this separation of duties into place, like you should really think about considering that harmful in your organization and look for ways to like automate code reviews, automate pushes, kind of build these standardized pipelines that are accepted by audit. If you have any questions on this or you need some help on this, I have 3 resources for you. So one is this, it's kind of older now, but still useful for developers with access to production, blog post. There's the DevOps Audit Defense Toolkit, which is a great 20-page write-up and how to work with auditors and kind of adopting DevOps practices. And then there's a new resource we just started working on here in April called Dear Auditor, and it's available over at dearauditor.org. And it's a love letter from a DevOps to audit and making some new promises. And there's a controls matrix and framework that sort of speaks the language of auditors and DevOps at the same time. And so our real hope is to continue to build this out. I'm working with TopoPal and some other folks that's on there. So it was a really, really fun group. So check that out. It's over in GitHub, but you can start just at dearauditor.org. All right, so the next one is enforce stability is the old way, and the new way is create chaos. So we saw that Netflix stole the hearts and minds of everybody with the Chaos Monkey. There's the Antifragile book. Michael Nygaard's Release It book has a great couple of chapters on chaos engineering, so highly recommend that. Aaron Reinhardt's a great person to follow in this. He's doing tons of research in the chaos area, and he has the Chaos Slinger project, which is really quite excellent as well. It adds misconfig to the stacks. It does chaos experiments. It runs as a serverless Lambda, so that's definitely worth checking out and kind of getting involved in that community. And I'm seeing more chaos engineering and security kind of overlaps like pop up, and we're going to continue to see more of this because it helps people think not just about security as something that is a detractor, but this is something that adds value, right? I'm able to withstand it. I'm able to detect something. I'm able to kind of survive an attack, whether it's malicious or not, right? So anyway, so there's a bunch of pieces to this, but I would highly recommend for just a primer on this, Nygaard's Release It book. There's a couple chapters on chaos, and that's really good place to start. I think another place where we add chaos or where we are kind of injecting some instability to the system is bug bounties. So I find if you're not doing this, there's some great companies out there. You can roll your own, or like HackerOne or BugCrowd, and those are some good options for you. But we're already being pen tested on the internet, and this allows kind of helping bring those people and giving them some reward type benefit out of doing that. So. Old path versus new path. The next one here is build a wall versus zero trust networks. So the ACL is moved to the network application or the application layer. Great book on this is Zero Trust Networks. So you just sort of assume compromise at all layers. Google has the Beyond Corp stuff, so that's really helpful as well. Wendy Nather came on the Modern Security series, which we host over at Signal Sciences, and she talked about this. If you're interested in it, this link has a recording on it, and it was a really great time. Okay, next one is slow validation and versus fast and non-blocking. So fast and non-blocking, we don't want to slow down delivery. We want to sit inside the pipeline, sometimes maybe on the side of the pipeline. Maybe we do penetration testing at like a different cadence, but we still do it so regular that it's really helpful. Signal Sciences, we do about 15 deploys a day. So we're about 10,000, maybe even 12,000 deploys now in the last 2.5, 3 years. It all started, I read the book by Jez Humble and David Farley, and said, okay, well, how do we build this out so that we can deploy as little at a time as we can? And we try to optimize for overall cycle time from code commit to running in production, and that was kind of our impetus there. We gave power for everybody in the team to do their own deploys, and yet we're also a security company, and so that is something that we really needed to focus on and think about. And we needed security to be part of our overall CI/CD type approach. So we do this through lots of different places, and I think of the pipeline in these phases. You may have different words to describe it, but I like kind of honing in on these 3 areas. So like, what have I bundled into my application that's leaving me vulnerable or that I don't even know that I have there? For build, do I have build acceptance tests and integration tests that catch security issues before release? And operationally, am I being attacked right now? Is it working? I kind of talked about that in a little bit already. So, okay, let's move on. I got a couple more, and then I know I'm running low on time here, so I'm trying to kick it into fast mode here. So, certainty testing versus adversity testing. Shannon Leitz has great stuff that she talks about doing pen testing over at Intuit, so definitely check that out when you get a chance. Over at Gauntlet, we have a thing where the Gauntlet's an open source testing project, but we use this phrase, be mean to your code. And there's a quote in here about how we should always be able to do this from the Agile Application Security book. But security tools are really difficult to use. They're always really noisy. And we needed a method for collaboration between devs and ops and security engineers. There needed to be a language that was able to span all 3 groups and kind of merge them all together. That's the genesis of Gauntlet. That's how Gauntlet came about. We wanted something that could be written in a natural language that developers, security, and operations could all understand. It wraps security testing tools, but it didn't necessarily install them. It doesn't install them. It's built to be a part of your CI/CD pipeline, and it's also open source and MIT licensed, so anybody can use that to take part in that. Simple Gauntlet test here. You describe your feature. If you're familiar with like Cucumber or any of the BDD tools, it's very similar to that. You have a scenario. So using this attack tool, Arachne, I'm looking for cross-site scripting, and I'm verifying no issues are found. So I have this given, when, then language. And you don't have to be a security expert to read this, right? You don't have to be, really knowledgeable about the entire code base of as a developer, or the operations team doesn't really have to like know all the ins and outs of this. They can kind of read this in a natural language, and they may not understand, like different people may not understand certain lines, but just because I don't know what this Arachne statement with different flags and stuff with it, I don't know what that means. I do understand that the output should contain 0 issues, and that's a passing test. So the idea is, as code makes its way through your pipeline, it's tested by the different things. Aaron Reinhardt, a good friend of mine, is a real big proponent of it. He says they really used Gauntlet to help bootstrap their DevSecOps initiative over at United Healthcare. I have a workshop where we kind of dig into this. And if you want the links for that, I'll kind of skip through some of these pieces here. But you can use Gauntlet in a Docker container. We have links for that as well. Let's see. Okay, then let's kind of get through the last bits here. So this slide is from Shannon Leitz's talk over at DevOps Days Austin in 2016. And I really like the way she breaks down the deployment phases here and kind of the different questions to ask in this. I recently gave a talk that sort of expands on the CI/CD pipeline and how security fits in all those phases, if you're interested in that. And it breaks it down into 5 stages, and we kind of look at those different places. So things like where you inherit code. So like this is your real line of code count. So for Sonatype and Nexus, like this is, people are really interested, or people are real understandable of this type of thing, like having a bill of materials and things like that. So we'll kind of move on. Sometimes we forget about kind of container security. I know we've already had a lot of container things built into this into the day already. But there's a great talk about a year ago by Gareth Rushgrove. That's what's inside that container, and we still see like high priority security vulnerabilities in Docker containers. The last bit is whether being process driven or having the paved road mentality. I like how Jason Chan over at Netflix says this. He says, make it easy for people to do the right thing. And so if people kind of participate in what's known as the paved road, they get security stuff for free. So they use gold images, they have blessed build-ins dependencies. And it really gets down into the core of this. Like, security needs to learn not to be a blocker, but be an enabler of the business. You do this by showing, having empathy for other folks, having enablement, try to be fast and non-blocking, not slowing delivery, put security testing in every phase, kind of like we were talking about in the previous panel. And really, like, we're trying to make security normal throughout the business. And I think that's a big step from the right direction for us. So if you'd like to copy the slides, or if there's any way else that I can help you, please feel free to email me, james@signalsciences.com. And I think I'm good on time. So I think I'm done on this. So thanks. And I know that was a lot of slides, and I apologize for that, but I hope you enjoyed and really appreciate having you here today.
Yeah, James, excellent as always. Thank you very much. And yeah, you were on time, even though we're going to break. We have a couple of minutes before Shannon Leitz is up next, if I have read the schedule right. So giving Shannon some shout outs so far. I know she's on Slack.
You definitely I saw that and I was like, I get to warm up for Shannon, so that's good. Like, you definitely want to definitely want to stick around for Shannon's talk. Let me just say that you definitely want to stick around for that.
And Damon Edwards up after her, so
Damon, definitely Damon as well. Like, Damon's. I watch Damon's talks all the time, and I'm like, man, I feel like way smarter than I was before, but man, I have a long way to go to get to Damon status. So it's great. Like, you always learn something.
Presentations. So the only person I know that I'm like, there are 100 slides in this deck, and you only have a half an hour, but James has a way for those of us with short attention spans and fast reading to keep up. I know you're going to make the slides available. Can you drop them on the Slack channel?
I will. Yep.
For us, I posted. So I think it's at least the second mention of Nygaard's book, the second edition.
Yeah. The second edition is great because it has that expanded chapters on chaos engineering, and he kind of moves some of the other stuff. So I think that's it's really worth picking up the second edition. And he still keeps all the same stuff from the first edition, like circuit breaker patterns and stuff like that.
Yeah, I have the first edition, but I don't have the second one. So now it's on my Amazon cart. So excellent. Thank you so much. Thank you as well for jumping into our panel discussion earlier. So you did 2 sessions in a day. I think we're on a webinar together next week.
That's right. That's right.
Next week. So I'm going to take a couple days of vacation in between, but I'll look forward to chatting with you and Kevin next week as well.
Yeah, that's going to be great. Yeah, we're going to talk about some of the DevSecOps report, and I'll put a link to that if people are interested in kind of checking that out as well.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, that'll be good. So we can get more people there on this conversation.
That's right. Yeah.
With that, this channel is, we're going to stop broadcasting on this channel. We're going to go to Shannon Leitz on the new channel. So for those of you watching online, check Schedule. You'll have the link to the next session that should be up and running soon if it's not already. And James, thanks as always. We'll see you again soon.
All right. Sounds good.
Bye.
Thanks, y'all.